You may not have noticed there was a full moon tonight. I guess the words of Psalm 19:1 are just about as famous as any of the Psalms, except maybe Psalm 23. The heavens are telling of the glory of God, and their expanse is declaring the work of his hands. Now, I've said this before when I've spoken on that verse, that I can just see David on the top of his house, and you know how those houses are in Mediterranean houses. They're still like that today, in fact, that they had flat roofs with a little parapet around them. And I can just see him up there on his roof looking up at this sky and uttering those words, of course, by the inspiration of God. David, though, lived about 3,000 years ago. All kinds of things have changed since David lived. We're going to talk about some of those changes and what effect they have on us and what effect they may have had on David tonight as we go through our lesson. But one of the things for sure, David never saw the moon that close up. That requires a pretty good telescope. This is probably what David saw on a clear night, and there are a lot of clear nights long before they ever had the industrial age, and we have all of our lights down here that cause us never to see the Milky Way this way. But then if you've had the pleasure of, as I have, of going up in the high mountains on a very clear night, that's what it looks like. Even more impressive than this picture, and you just stare in wonder and awe at the sky because we just don't see it normally. Partly the pollution that's in the air, and partly the lights and such things like that. But David saw this way quite often. And apparently he never got tired of looking at it or talking about it, because in other Psalms he mentions the heavens. For instance, in Psalm 8. In verse 3 he says, "When I consider your heavens, the work of your fingers, the moon and the stars which you have ordained. What is man that you take thought of him, and the Son of Man that you care for him?" Well, that last part would be a passage referring later to Jesus Christ. But I can imagine, again, because I feel this way today, that looking at the sky and looking at the wonders of that sky and realizing how small you are in comparison to it, that you could say with David, what is man compared to this majestic glory of God's power, his greatness? But there were a bunch of things that David didn't see. What a wonderful thing it was the first time we were able to see the astronauts looking back at Earth and seeing. In fact, there's a picture I couldn't find at this time, which is famous, called Earthrise, coming up over the moon. But this globe of it, looking from space, is impressive enough for us. David never saw the world like this. In fact, David's domain was somewhere right around where that yellow circle is. That's probably even bigger than his domain, but right in there is where Israel is on that globe. And, of course, David would have gone into the lands just adjacent to Israel, but David was not a globetrotter. He didn't go very far into the world, and certainly not over that vast distance of our earth. And most of us have not been over it either. But what a beautiful place our little planet is. What's interesting is that apparently somebody long before modern ages knew that we lived on a globe. It appears that Job knew it, because in Job chapter 26, Job says in verse 7, "He stretches out the north over empty space and hangs the earth on nothing." That's a remarkable passage. And when I was looking in the Hebrew Bible section that I've got on my computer and the commentaries on it, that's exactly what they said. This is a remarkable passage, and it means just exactly that. He hangs the earth on nothing. Now, you probably have heard this story, and it's not far-fetched, because if you've read some of the, well, let's say the Native American stories of creation, they're kind of naive, to say the least. But one story goes that the earth sat on the back of this huge giant. Of course, among the Greeks, that was Atlas. But another story goes that the earth was set on the back of a giant turtle. And someone asked the question, well, what's a turtle standing on? And the reply was, after a little bit of thought, well, it's another giant turtle. And the question again, well, what's that turtle standing on? And then the person said in frustration, it's turtles all the way, just as far back as it goes. Well, what are you going to do when you have such an idea? But no, Job says he hangs the earth on nothing. And Job, who was a wise man and who was a good man, didn't know that. But God, who gave him inspiration, who created that little ball, did know it. And so Job spoke with the inspiration of God and told the truth. Isaiah chapter 4.